Hey, Forefront 5 listeners, I'm your host, Dr. Betsy Warnley, and today I am so excited to talk to not only two interesting men, but true heroes. Now, if you're a Netflix subscriber, you may have recognized our intro song as the tune for the hit series Narcos. And yes, backed by popular demand is our friends Steve and Javier. I really don't know how to adequately introduce these two men, as time would never really allow a complete introduction. But Steve Murphy and Javier Pena are two real guys, the real men from season 1 and 2 of Narcos, the guys who hunted and took down Pablo Escobar, the most notorious and barbaric drug cartel leader probably in history. We will get into the hunt for Pablo in a bit, but Steve and Javier, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Betsy. Proud to be here with you.
Me too. Thank you, Betsy.
Yeah, you bet. Let's kick it off, guys, with a bit of history about both of you. Steve, let's start with you. Tell us about your upbringing and your journey to becoming a famous DEA agent.
Well, that wasn't the ultimate objective, but it's kind of funny how things work out in life, isn't it? You know, Betsy, since I was a little kid, I just wanted to be a police officer. Never really wanted to do anything else. Grew up in Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, just south of Nashville. My father was a minister. My mom was a bookkeeper at a local bank. But as I was getting ready to go into high school, my family decided they wanted to move back where they came from, which was southern West Virginia. So I went to high school and college in West Virginia. My dad, after he retired from the ministry, had a carpet store and with my uncle, and I was the only son of both families, and it was always expected that I would take over the business. I don't know if you've ever done carpet work, but that's manual labor. I'm not built for manual labor. I hated it. And again, I just wanted to be a cop my whole life. So went to West Virginia University for a year. My dad made it plain he didn't pay for academic probation. I was way too young and immature to be away from home. So I came back home, and the local state college had a criminal justice program. I was one of the first students in that program, and I loved it. I mean, I just really, really loved it. And I was with the first intern to do the summer internships for the college there in the criminal justice program. And then that fall, the local police department was given a civil service test. I took the test, don't know how, but I scored the highest on the test, and the city offered me a job. I turned 19 in October of 1975, and in November, 1 month later, I was hired as a police officer, just barely 19 years old. Probably too young to be in that line of work, but I never looked back. I loved it.
Tell me about how you went into the DEA from the police force, being on the streets as a street cop and then moving on to narcotics.
Well, I was always interested in narcotics cases. I'd seen the movie Serpico as a kid, and I read all the Joseph Wambaugh books. He was an LA police officer. And as a city officer, a partner, actually another police officer, we weren't partners. We had an informant that called us one weekend night and says, hey, he said, there's this kid running around here selling pound quantities of weed. In 1976 in southern West Virginia, that was a lot of dope. So we set the guy up to come to a gas station, and sure enough, he showed up with a pound of weed, and we stepped out of the back room and arrested him. Kid was 17 years old. So we took him to the police station. One of the detectives came out, and I think everybody was just astounded that these two rookie officers were able to make a drug case. But the kid's dad showed up. And after talking to his dad, we cut the kid a break. We didn't charge him because we knew what was going to happen at home. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. His dad straightened him out. And the funny thing about that was in 1976. Just a few months ago, I got a message on Facebook from a guy that on Instant Messenger, and he says, hey, you probably don't remember me, but I'm that 17-year-old kid. And he was saying that, now I thank you so much for what you did. You cut me a break. I'm professional now. He's got his own business, and we've kind of become friends all these years later. So it's kind of neat how it all worked out.
That's fantastic. Did you then turn around and thank him for kind of fueling your love of greater narcotics cases, right?
I guess. And you know what? Then I went to be a railroad cop for almost 6 years, and just hated that. It was nothing against railroad police. They do a fine job, and it pays a whole lot better than the city pays. But I was always interested in narcotics cases. And one of the other railroad detectives was a former Virginia state trooper who worked with the DEA task force out of Roanoke, Virginia. So he encouraged me, and I completed my degree and applied for DEA. It took 2 years to get hired. First post was Miami, and I never looked back.
That's fantastic. It takes an amazing amount of time to become a DEA agent from initial application. It's crazy. Javier, your turn. Tell us about you.
Thank you. Yeah, I grew up in South Texas, a little town called Hebronville, Texas. It's about population 5,000. It's about 50 miles out of Laredo. Laredo's on the border. A lot of people don't know where Laredo is. But anyway, grew up there with a family. My dad was a rancher. I worked summers picking watermelons, and that's why right now I hate watermelons. I cannot eat them. Like I said, I used to work all the summers in the hot sun, 100 degrees, rattlesnakes. I hate rattlesnakes also. Anyway, so we went to college, went to A&I in Kingsville, and I was taking a sociology class, and there was an internship being offered at Huntsville, which is where Department of Corrections is, the prison system in Texas. So I applied, got accepted, and went up there. It was a 3-month internship where I learned a lot, saw a lot. And then a buddy of mine from Laredo calls us, Javier, there's a new sheriff been elected. This is 1977. They're looking for deputies. I know the sheriff. I applied, got the job, moved to Laredo. I had my grandmother there. My grandparents lived with them. So I worked with the sheriff's office. And I think I was like Steve, I was like 19 or 20 years old. And, I had the best of both worlds. I was living with my grandparents, and, my grandma took care of me, cooked for me. So I would work at nighttime, go to school during the day. And then all of a sudden I see I'm graduating, and I see on the bulletin board where DEA was hiring. And I told people I did not know what DEA was. A buddy of mine said, "Oh, it's the federal narcs, man." Okay. So, but they were paying like 10,000 more than I was making in Laredo. I remember I was making like $10,000. But still, I was 20 years old. So I was with the sheriff's office 7 years, and I applied for DEA. And you're right, it took about 2 years to get hired on. The process, very lengthy process. But once I hired on, and with me, I really didn't want to stay with DEA. I didn't know what DEA was. So I said, I'm going to do 2 years, go back to Laredo, go back with the sheriff's office. And when I applied with DEA, you know what? I spent 30 years with them. So I guess I liked being with them.
That's fantastic. Steve, why don't you tell the audience what an actual DEA agent is and what a DEA agent does? Because I think it's a complicated and super sophisticated position.
Well, if we pulled our shirts off, you'd see a big S here on our chest.
Oh, I love that.
Super women. But you can see you're talking to two old men today, so that's not quite accurate. DEA is the only, other than the IRS, it's the only single mission agency in federal law enforcement. With DEA enforces the drug laws, and that's it. I mean, there's some peripheral laws that go along with that, money laundering and so forth, but it's the only agency other than the IRS that brings in more money than it spends, believe it or not. So it makes a profit because of all the asset seizures. But a DEA agent, I was kind of worried, to be honest with you, that I might get bored being, just working drug cases. Boy, was I wrong there, because I loved it. But there are a lot of different things that you can do within DEA. So primarily you enforce the U.S. federal laws pertaining to schedules 1, 2, 3, and then occasionally 4, but not very often. The Drug Abuse Controlled Substances Act. I'm sorry. It's been a long time since I had to talk about this stuff. So you actually go out and investigate the organizations. But the thing about DEA is you don't really care about the street level dealers. Especially the users. A lot of people think, oh, DEA guys are out busting people for smoking weed. That's not true. I mean, better, as well as we do, Betsy, because of your husband. But DEA's goal is to go after the biggest traffickers around the world, not just in the United States, but around the world, that have a negative impact on the United States. There's not a lot of drugs that, other than pharmaceuticals, and that's a different topic. But you look at cocaine, that's not, the coca plants are not produced here in the United States. They're not grown here. Neither are the opium plants, the poppies. So there's a lot of methamphetamine that's synthetic, but it's primarily produced in Mexico, based on chemicals coming from China. So we do have our problems here in the United States, but that's why we were in Colombia. We get an opportunity to go after the biggest traffickers in the world that are having a negative impact on us. And in this particular case, Pablo Escobar, he was the world's first narco-terrorist. Now, what's a narco-terrorist? It's basically just a narcotics trafficker who employs terroristic activities in his criminal business. So Pablo was the first narco-terrorist. He was the world's most wanted criminal. You remember that show, America's Most Wanted? They came to Colombia and did one episode and called it the world's most wanted. Javier and I took him to Medellin for a week and filmed things up there for him. This is a guy who developed a business model that made him responsible for as much as 80% of the world's cocaine. And just think about that. You guys are in private industry. Wouldn't you like to have 80% of the dermatology market?
Absolutely.
So that's the guy we're talking about here, Mr. Pablo Escobar. That's
fantastic. And I think it's unique that the DEA, not only is it extremely difficult to get into the DEA, it's a very arduous interview process and application process. And then once you become a DEA, there's a small number of you. Once you become a DEA agent, you have kind of purview outside of the US, which is much different than FBI. And even as you've spoken before to our folks, some of the SEAL teams in Delta, they're somewhat restricted in their enforcement, whether it be politics or actual, the scope of their arresting power versus DEA. So can you talk about that aspect of the DEA being different than other law enforcement agencies?
Right. So DEA has the largest footprint of any federal law enforcement agency from the United States outside of the United States. Gosh, I don't even know how many countries they're in now. I'm going to guess it's in the 70s. I know when we were in Colombia, most of the FBI offices, they call them legal attaches. They had 2 people in each of the offices, but they weren't in as many cities or countries around the world as DEA. So we had that large footprint. And when Javier and I were there chasing Pablo, I think we had 23 agents in Colombia. And that might have just been in Bogota, but that included the bosses. And, everybody had different responsibilities. So everybody was not out in the field. That's not a lot of agents when you're going after the biggest cocaine traffickers in the world. DEA also has its own air fleet. So I know back when we were in Colombia, DEA had about 100 aircraft worldwide. That sounds like a lot. We had 1 plane available in Bogota. But, you look at somebody like Pablo Escobar, he probably had 3 to 5 times the number of aircraft we had. It was, we're flying around this little twin-engine Aero Commander, and he's flying around his private jets and his private helicopter and so forth. But it is also unique because there are laws on the books in the United States that allow us to go after criminals, even if they don't step foot into the United States. So one of the elements of a crime you have to prove in court is venue, which typically the venue has to be within that judicial district where the charge is being filed. But there are laws on the books that allow us that if we can prove that their criminal activities are destined for the United States, then you can go after them and they never have to step foot in our country.
That's amazing. And it kind of tells the story as to why you guys were the ones that accomplished the big task of taking down Pablo. So let's take it. I think this is addressed to Javier because I believe you were the first one down in Colombia and Pablo was on your radar first. How did he become, your next mission, Javier?
Yes. I got there to Colombia in 1988. And ironically, when I was in Austin, Texas, my big boss I answered to was a person by the name of Joe Top. And he was out of San Antonio. So he was my big boss. I was the working guy in Austin. And so I get selected to Colombia, and then all of a sudden he gets promoted and becomes the boss in Colombia. So we basically arrived at the same time in Bogota, and he knew my work ethic. So within a month, he says, Javier, I'm giving you the Pablo Escobar investigation. And I had a partner, a senior partner, who was leaving at that time, transitioning. So I took over that investigation and did not know much about Pablo Escobar. I had heard the name, knew the reputation, but once I started digging in, once I started really looking at him and working with our counterparts with our cops. It was something that we had never expected. We did not realize Escobar was that trafficker that he was. So all of a sudden, I'm a new guy, and I'm working with the cops, and I'm just saying, hey, this guy is bigger. We hadn't realized how big he was, which is what started, basically a lot of different philosophies on how to go after Pablo Escobar.
Fantastic. And then Steve obviously became your partner. Tell us about you moving your family to Colombia. And Steve, specifically in the Netflix series, it talks about, you flew down there, your wife had her cat. I remember that in the episode. And then they left and went back at a certain point. But I don't think that's true. So tell about you moving down there, becoming Javier's partner, and then your family.
Well, and thank you for bringing that up there, because my wife and I, we were in Miami for 4 years. 1989, my partner at that time, a guy named Kevin Stevens, and I were the inside arrest team for an undercover deal in Hialeah. Long story short, we ended up in a gun battle, and our informant was killed, and my partner Kevin was shot twice. So it was a very exciting time in South Florida at that time. But in 1990, my wife came to me. She's a registered nurse. She's just recently retired here back in March, which I'm happy because of this virus that's going around. And it's almost a fight every day with her that she wants to go back. And I keep saying, no, 46 years is enough. You need to kick back and take a little time. But anyway, she came to me there in Miami. She said, this has been really exciting. What's the next most exciting thing we can do? And I said, well, we could go to Colombia. And she looked at me like I had 3 heads. But she thought about it, and so I introduced her to an agent from Barranquilla that was traveling through Miami, and we had dinner, and she grilled him for about 3 hours at dinner one night. And it wasn't just a couple weeks after that. She said, hey, if we're going to do this, let's do it while we're young. So this going to Colombia had a lot to do with her. When we showed up down there, we did have a cat named Puff, and Puff did die in Colombia. But Puff was old. He had a heart attack. We didn't have the sicarios break in our apartment and sacrifice the cat and hang him on our front door like it's shown in the Narcos series.
That's a good story, though, Steve. It was a good story.
It was. Well, it just shows you the writers out there kind of sick up here. They are phenomenal writers, though. But we're in Colombia, and if you watch the Narcos series, there's a lot in there that's not true. But at the beginning of season 2, I think it is, they show my wife and I get into this argument, and we've adopted our first daughter, and she just gets on a plane and goes back to Miami. Now, to set this up in real life, what would happen is when the writers would write an episode, they would email it to Javier and I, and we would review the script, and we'd try to pick out little things to make it a little bit more accurate and things like that. Well, my wife was portrayed in there as well. Her real name is Connie. And so she got an opportunity to read the scripts as well. Well, I'm reading that script where it shows her going back to Miami, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is not going to be good. So I read it, and I give it to her, and a couple hours later, she's reading it, and the next thing you know, she comes into me, and she's waving that script. She's going, did you read this crap? Did you read this? It's not true. I never left you down there. And I'm saying, baby, I didn't write the thing. This is Hollywood.
Well, tell Connie that I'm blowing it open. She stayed there. She was a major reason you were there. So kudos to the women in your life, for sure.
Absolutely. She stood behind me 100 times. And I can't tell you how many times she gave up her career as a nurse to follow me because of all the transfers we did. And, if you take the promotions, you're going to move. So she's ever been as much involved in this as Javier and I were.
That's awesome. Speaking of family, how threatened did Connie feel? Did you feel for your family down in Colombia, especially when things got hot?
Well, see, Javier and I, we actually moved up to Medellin from Bogota after Pablo escaped. So, you're kind of away from it, but that left my wife there by herself. She doesn't speak fluent Spanish. She picked up some words. She's got an open personality. And what we found out is the Colombians are some of the nicest people in the world. The only ones I'd ever met before I got there were the ones I'd put in jail in South Florida. And as wrong as this is, you tend to stigmatize the whole country. And what we found out is if you go in with an open attitude, you're willing to accept their culture because, hey, you happen to be a visitor in their country, by the way, and you try to get along, and she tried to speak the Spanish that she could, and she's willing to laugh at herself. Man, those are some of the nicest, most accepting people we've ever met in our lives. It always have a special place in our heart, and I think Javier would say the same thing. So we tried to adopt children. I have two sons from a prior marriage. They stayed in the States. And Connie and I tried to adopt when we lived in South Florida, but it was a racket. We just didn't have the money to, we didn't have $30,000 back then to fork over. And so when we got to Colombia, Connie found out that at that time, Colombia was the leading country in the world for U.S. adoptions. And she was able to make connections. And that's how we ended up with our first daughter. And what Narcos didn't show you, they were supposed to show you in season 2, but we actually adopted a second little girl. So Monica was 8 months old. She's from just north of the city of Bogota. Mandy was 5 months old. She's from Medellin, Colombia. They're both
awesome.
Both now in their mid-20s.
You didn't return. I read somewhere or talked to you about this. You didn't return for years and years. It was rather recently that you brought your two daughters back. What changes did you see from when you adopted them to your last visit?
That's a great question because not many people ask that. So we prepared our daughters. They were in their early 20s, and we prepared them mentally for the way we remember Colombia. Hey, you're going to see armed patrols everywhere. You're going to see Jeeps with machine guns on the back. There's areas of town we're not going to go to. We're probably not going to be going out at nighttime. Netflix and brought us down, and they were providing us with a driver and a van. So, I said, just you stick close to mom and dad and everything will be okay. Well, when we landed there, the airport that we remembered was old and grungy and dirty. And it just, Connie and I got off the plane with the girls and we stepped off the airplane out in the jetway. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we landed in the wrong airport. This is not Bogota. We didn't know that they rebuilt the whole airport there. And what we saw was a great surprise. The place has modernized more than what it was. It's relatively safe, just like any big city in the United States. There's parts of the city you don't go to because they're dangerous, but the parts we were in, we were going out at nighttime, walking around, going to restaurants, going to see the sights in the daytime. We were so happy to see that Colombia, as beautiful as that country was when we lived there, was even more beautiful now.
That's fantastic. Javier, so you were down there. You kind of talked about Pablo was given as kind of a smaller case to you, and you turned it into a bigger case using, your talent to go after narcotics. And then this Irish guy comes down and becomes your partner. What'd you think of Steve?
Yeah, I didn't know Steve. I mean, obviously I had heard of him. And, when he get to Colombia, we had another partner, Gary Sheridan, he had been promoted, so he was leaving. So all three of us pretty much, were together working on the Pablo Escobar case. So anyway, as soon as Steve came in, we remember we went to Medellin, and I said, Steve, this is a little different. It's not your usual manhunt. It's not your usual drug investigation. It's a little unorthodox because of who Pablo Escobar was and the group of cops. So we all started working together, and all of a sudden, we get along. And, I got to mention, we're very opposite. I tell people Steve is the most organized guy I've ever met. I'm the most disorganized guy I've ever met. But our qualities, we fit. And all of a sudden, we trusted each other. We're the only two in Medellin. So it's a different, it's a trust that, I know he's covering for me and I'm covering for him, and we're not going to get hurt. That was our main objective, stay safe and go after Pablo Escobar, help out our counterparts. We called it the search block, and it was a specialized group of cops that had been handpicked to go after Pablo Escobar. So the good thing is we knew this guy's from Bogota. So they ended up going to Medellin. So we already knew the trust was already there. So that made it a lot easier. They call Steve Stick. They can pronounce Steve, so Stick was his nickname. And we got along. It was one of those where obviously there were a couple of guys at the search block we didn't get along with, and later on stuff happened, but for the most part, our boss, Colonel Martinez, was a great guy, and it was a trust. But it was, like I said, the trust had been built because of the hatred for Pablo Escobar. Like, is it this specialized group of guys? A couple of them had been killed by Pablo Escobar, so it was really, I'll use the word revenge. It was a revenge type search for Pablo, and the thing that worked for Steve and I is they trusted us, we trusted them, and we bonded together, going after, like we've all mentioned, the world's most notorious, barbaric narco trafficker that we have seen.
That's fantastic. I think getting behind a common cause unites people in unique ways, especially when it's as dangerous as the mission that you guys face. So, Javier, on a lighter note, Netflix paints quite the picture of getting into the Colombian culture, especially with you. Did you enjoy the females in Colombia as much as the series shows?
Well, let me tell you, I was single. I was single at the time, so I dated people, of course. I mean, it's a beautiful country, beautiful people, but I didn't, I didn't date communists or informants. That's Netflix. So, it was a great time in Colombia. It was dangerous, but again, and Steve said it earlier, Colombians are great, hardworking people. So of course I had my fun. So I learned how to dance merengue, how to dance salsa. There was a lot of great dancing, camaraderie, music, and of course I had a couple of beers, so I like that. Yes.
I like
But
that.
in the Narco series, yeah. If you think it's true in the Narco series, I'll leave it at that. And if you think it's true, it is true.
For the
But-
listeners, I would love my listeners to see Steve's face during this. So Steve, go for it.
I was going to say, that's the one part of Narcos that is true.
You know what, Javier? I think we all want it to be true. You're like Casanova in all of our.
Yes, that it is true. So, but it wasn't informers, communists, hookers, stuff like that.
I love it. I love it. And thanks for your commentary, Steve. So in the Netflix series, they highlight Los Pepes. I think I'm pronouncing that right?
Yes, that is correct.
A group of radicals in Colombia with ties to narcotics who began to attack Pablo and his organization to get their own foothold in the drug trade and really get revenge for the death of their family members. So it was kind of like competing cartel or group. Javier, Netflix painted a picture of you having maybe a relationship with this group. It was kind of controversial. Is this true?
Now, you know what? Wow, that's a great question. A lot of people, wow, Betsy, you're good at this, so I appreciate it. The questions are great. Yeah, Don Berna was the head of the security. Remember in the Netflix, they killed Moncada Galliano, Pablo Escobar's main lieutenants. Pablo kills one, the sicarios kill the other. So they grouped together, led by Don Berna. And now we see Don Berna in real life at our search block. We did not know that Don Berna was the head of security. So anyway, so he's at the search block. Steve and I meet him. We get along with him. Nice guy, and he had a group of about 10 guys. And remember, the colonel. I said, Colonel, there's something weird about this guy, Colonel Martinez. He says, Javier, there is something weird, but he's been authorized to work with us, meaning the search block, by the Colombia Attorney General. So I'm not going to question the Attorney General. We're there as guests. So all of a sudden, Don Berna has people. And then, when things got really, really busy, when we formed the 800 number, and it was an 800 number that the U.S. was offering $5 million reward for Pablo Escobar. So people were calling left and right. So at the beginning, the police would, we wouldn't want the informants to come into the base, so we would meet them at a bus station in Medellin. The bus station was like the biggest bus station in Colombia. There'd be like 2,000 people 1,000 people at a given time at this bus station. So we'd go meet the informant, and then there was one time the cops were, man, here, Steve, we can't cover y'all, man. We're busy operation. So Don Berna says, I'll take care of them, don't worry. Well, the cop said, great, Don Berna, they're under your responsibility. So Don Berna, later on, we find out what he did was providing security for Steve and I. And we, he had 10 guys. They were like police. They'd go in, make sure it wasn't a hit on us. You know what I'm saying? At the bus station, it could have been a setup. They were going to kill Pena and Steve. So there's an informant, paid by the cartel. So they would go in, make sure that wasn't the case. So yes, Don Berna. And in, like I said, in real life, after Pablo Escobar gets killed, we find out that Don Berna was actually the head of Los Pepes after we leave. And it was about 2 years afterwards. There was a big investigation because there was an article written in the press in Miami. I'll never forget the Miami Herald article. And it made Colombia, where it says Pena was part of Los Pepes. So can you imagine? I mean, I laugh about it now, but back then I was like, what? I'm being accused of being a right-wing vigilante squad leader. And I think it was even the head, that I was directing all the hits. In Los Pepes, when they first came on, and you're right, Betsy, they were made up of traffickers that Pablo Escobar was killing their families. So they hated Pablo. And they loved their bosses, Moncada and Gariano, but now Pablo was killing all of them. So they said, you know what? Their main purpose was to kill Pablo Escobar's wife, his kids, and his mother. It was a dirty war. They were able to kill 30 of Escobar's associates. So then I get accused of being a member. Obviously, that wasn't true. But when that accusation came in, I was now the number 2 guy in Colombia. So that cost me a lot of grief. But obviously, DEA backed me. We had a great ambassador who backed me. It wasn't true. But that is that part of the Netflix story. And I'm going to mention, I don't tell too many people, but this is kind of funny. But Netflix, when they wrote the part up, they called me up and they said, Javier, by the way, your character on the second series, we're going to put you a little bit crossing the line. And if you've seen the show, you think I did cross the line, correct? Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and by crossing the line, I mean being a dirty cop. So anyway, they said, Javier, we know it's not true. They're very apologetic, but, we have artistic licenses we're going to employ. And by the way, we're sending you a paper, just sign it. Don't worry about it. I said, what am I signing? It's just part of our deal. So, I tell people, you know what? I didn't give a shit. I signed that bullshit of paper because I was making money off of Netflix. That's why I signed it. Basically, what I signed was that I was not going to be able to sue Netflix because of my character assassination. So that's what that's all about.
The media strikes again. Well, that's great insider information that you shared with us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Javier. Steve, you had talked in the past about the SEALs in Delta being there, especially towards the end, but they were really hamstrung and not able to leave the base. What were they there for, and why weren't they able to leave and search out Pablo with you?
Well, so this is like true confessions now, because we were all under the same rules. The ambassador at the time was a retired Navy commander, Morris Busby. We love the guy to death. I mean, he's a can-do kind of guy. He's not a passive, typical State Department who's worried about diplomacy. This is a guy that wanted to get the job done, which was good for us. But he also brought in SEAL Team 6, and he brought in the Delta Force to work with us. Well, we're working with the cops, not so much the Colombian military, but they were gracious enough to let these operators come in. These guys they really are like Supermen. I mean, Javier and I have the utmost respect for them. We tell everybody, if we're ever kidnapped, that's who we want to come and get us, because we've seen them work. They are that good. I mean, it's just phenomenal. But we were all under the rules of not leaving the base in Colombia. We were there in an advisory capacity to the Colombian National Police, to the search block. Well, Javier and I, we discussed at the very beginning, we can't do our job if we're stuck here in the base all the time. You lose, they're going to lose all respect for us. They're not going to share information. It's going to end up being one-sided, where we're giving them information. They're not giving us anything back. So at the very beginning, we decided we're going to go do our jobs the way we've been doing. And we're just not going to go talk about it back in Bogota. Well, the operators, honestly, we believe if they had been allowed to do their jobs the way they do their jobs, that in 3 months or less, Pablo Escobar would have been captured. But because they're military, they follow orders. And so they didn't leave the base. For us, it worked. The sad part, I guess the sad part of that whole thing is, it took 18 months before Pablo was finally killed. So how many people could have been saved if they'd been allowed to do their job? I mean, what the heck? We were wasting the best special operators in the world by not letting them go out and do their jobs. They primarily were relegated to a training capacity where they were training they're training the Colombian National Police in some of the best tactics that are out there. So it's phenomenal training. And when I was there, I'm a former firearms instructor with DEA. I would go out with them, and we built a mock city we called a Hogan's Alley there on the base to teach these guys how to breach doors, how to safely do searches in buildings. Everything went along with marksmanship, the whole ball of wax. But because Javier and I were allowed to go out, it's not like it was in the Narcos series where we're running all across the rooftops in these gun battles by ourselves. We always had the Colombian National Police with us. We had absolutely no jurisdiction down there. We're a guest in their country at their invitation. We did have diplomatic immunity, which that gives you a certain level of comfort, that if you do get yourself in a really bad situation, at least you'll get back to the United States. But because of the trust and the respect that we developed for the cops as well as them for us, it worked. That's how this whole thing worked.
That's fantastic. Hogan's Alley, was that specifically in Colombia? Because they have one of those in Quantico now. Did they name it after you guys?
Oh, no. That was around long before then. And the one we had in Colombia was just basically 2x4s with plywood, and we would put doors on them, and then we'd blow them all to pieces, and then we'd have to rebuild them and do it again.
Awesome. Well, are you allowed to talk, since we're sharing super secrets here, guys, are you allowed to talk about the CIA's involvement and the Center Spike program?
Sure. Which one of us you want to tell you the truth?
Yeah.
You guys vote. Tell me.
Go ahead, Javier.
Yeah. I'll let Steve is really good with the Center Spike stuff. But with me and the CIA, we did not get along. When we formed the search block, there were a couple of guys, from the CIA, assigned to the search block for the technology aspect, for the electronic intercepts. However, they did not know Pablo Escobar like the way we knew Pablo Escobar. We knew the insides, and because they were also kind of secretive, our Colombian counterparts also did not like him because they were like, Javier, they'd say, Javier, Steve, man, y'all are always helping us out in operations, risking your lives. Those guys are always staying behind, very secretive. So anyway, but it was just a difference of culture. It was a difference of we're searching, we're looking for actionable intelligence, where they're looking for electronic intelligence. However, it's not being shared with us on a daily basis. It's not being shared with us on an easy type basis. It's like climbing through hoops to get a piece of information. So we did not really rely on them. And then I had a real negative experience with the head of the CIA in Colombia at that time, where I was threatened that I was going to be charged with treason. Basically, because Colonel Martinez, the head of the search block, we intercepted Pablo Escobar. We brought in Colonel Martinez, listened to the tape. He listened to it, and he said, wow, that's Pablo Escobar. And we hadn't heard of Escobar in about 6 months. So his eyes, his face was lit up. He was like happy. We got him again. And all he asked me for a copy of that tape. So I asked the CIA, can you give me a copy, give it to Colonel Martinez? And the guy said, yeah, no problem. All of a sudden, they called their boss in Colombia, in Bogota. His boss calls me, the CIA boss. I'm a working agent. Oh, wow. It was just, I'll never forget that threat. If I turned over that tape to Colonel Martinez, he was going to go after me with indictments. Now I know that wouldn't have happened. But, that's a scare tactic. I'm like, I thought, and here we are at a base owned by the Colombian National Police. They're the head, they're the lead in the search of Pablo Escobar. So, then Colonel Martinez, I'll never forget, he said, oh, yeah, where's my tape? I said, Colonel, And I was honest. I told him the story, and he couldn't believe it. And I even told the colonel, if I was you, sir, I'd kick all the gringos, meaning, DEA, CIA, everybody out of your base. He didn't do it. He went back to Bogota. I gave him the frequency. So I just said, here's the frequency, Colonel. You can intercept it on your equipment, which is what happened.
Interesting. Steve, tell us about the Center Spike program.
Well, Center Spike is basically, and again, this is unclassified, so we can talk about it. It was a twin-engine aircraft, a King Air, that contained a lot of radio intercept equipment. And what you have to understand is the telephone technology back then was not 3G, 4G, even 5G like we enjoy today. It's basically radio telephones. So the phones worked off radio frequencies, the mobile phones. In fact, the cell phones, we were just starting to get those in the United States when I went to Colombia. Well, if you know anything about radio phones, it obviously operates off a radio frequency, and there's thousands of frequencies in the radio spectrum. So if Pablo wanted to thwart our activities of listening to him, all he had to do was change the dial on his radio phone, to a different frequency, and then we've got the challenge of trying to identify that new frequency. Of course, the challenge for him was he had to get the new frequency to the people he wanted to talk to, and that's a little bit harder. So it wasn't an easy feat for him. It's not something he enjoyed doing, but he could do it. So when we didn't know what the frequency was, Center Spike would fly over the city of Medellin, the airplane with their radio intercept equipment. They would listen to conversations that were in the open airwaves. And when they heard a voice that sounded similar, they had a voice exemplar of Pablo's conversations, and they would compare them and see if they could come up with a match. Well, what Javier was just talking about, where he was able to obtain the frequency that Pablo was talking on there, and towards the end there in late November, early December of 1993, we provided that frequency to Center Spike. So they go up on the frequency, they hear somebody talking, they compare it to the voice exemplar, and we get 100% match. That's Pablo. Well, that's great because we got the new frequency, but our problem was, where was he? That's what we want to know, because the radio intercept equipment doesn't pinpoint where the signal's coming from.
Neat stuff. I guess that's why you guys are special agents, right?
Well, we're special. I'm not sure why, though.
That's cool. How much easier would it be now with all their cell phone pinging? I mean, it's just a whole different ball game. So that's cool stuff. How long did it take to capture Pablo, and what was the turning point towards your success, Steve?
Well, we were there for 18 months. There were times when we would get dejected and disappointed because we felt like we're spinning our wheels, and we'd get so close at times, and then we'd miss him. And, my wife's back in Bogota, and Javier's tired of being away from home. And we even said, you know what, just let him give up. Just let him go back to his luxury prison, which was a country club, to be quite honest, that 1 year that he was in jail, the bombings did stop. He was infamous for setting off indiscriminate car bombs, killing innocent people. So for that 1 year, the car bombs did stop. When he was out of jail, the car bombs were always going on. There, towards the end, Los Pepis was really putting the pressure on. You know what? And they were using Pablo's tactics against him, is what made them successful. And you hate to give them any credit because they're really nothing more than a murderous group of vigilantes. We don't condone that in law enforcement, but the truth is they were very instrumental in bringing Pablo down. They had really decimated his organization, not only killing his associates, but people who supported his family through, it could be the grocery store or the hairdresser or, the dentist or whatever. Anybody associated with Pablo, Los Pepis was killing them. And that's exactly what Pablo did. So there in late November, we felt like we were getting closer and closer. Pablo seemed to be reducing his security when it came to being on the telephone, meaning that he was staying on a little bit longer and longer. But you know what? He was used to calling the president of Colombia. He was used to calling members of Congress. He was used to calling the press, and they would talk to him. Well, now nobody will talk to him. So if you think about it, who will talk to him? His son, his 17-year-old son, Juan Pablo. Now, the government has them sequestered into a hotel in downtown Bogota for their own protection. And that's how Javier was able to come up with that frequency. Well, on December 2nd, 1993, Pablo was talking to his son, giving him instructions. You call, the president's office, you call the press, you call those different people. they stayed on the phone so long that even the son said, "Dad, we need to hang up. You're on the phone too long." And Pablo ignored that and continued to talk. Back at the base, Colonel Hugo Martinez was our boss at the search block. He was in charge of the Colombian National Police, the entire operation. Well, there was a Lieutenant Hugo Martinez who his son, Lieutenant Martinez, had taught himself how to use radio directional finding equipment. This is the equipment you use to pinpoint where is that signal coming from. It's kind of a long story. I won't bore you with all the details, but the margin of error was rather large. It could be several city blocks large. So what you have to do to refine that margin of error is you send troops in holding handheld antennas out the car as they drive down the street. There's nothing obvious about that, is it, Betsy? I mean, that's something you see every day, isn't it?
That's super high tech too.
Isn't it? And so that's what Lieutenant Martinez did that day. He's the man driving down the street. He's got a driver, but he's in the passenger side holding that antenna out the window, looking at his monitor, and his monitor's showing him to look to his left. And he says he looked up that window and saw Pablo looking out the window talking on the phone. Now that begs the question, if you saw somebody driving down the street, if you're looking out your window and saw somebody driving down the street holding that antenna out, you're like, what the heck? And you know what? We even went back and listened to the conversation. Pablo never reacted to that whatsoever. And Lieutenant Martinez says that Pablo looked at him. The only explanation we've ever come up for with that is that, you know, like I'm talking to you now on a webinar, but occasionally I catch myself looking up because I'm in my mind. I'm thinking what I'm going to say to you. And I'm not really seeing what's in front of me. And I think, you know, I think we all probably do that to a certain degree. That's the only explanation we've ever come up with as to why Pablo didn't react when Lieutenant Martinez drove down the street that day. So now, to take that a step farther, you know, it shows in Narcos, it shows that I was on the roof with the Colombian National Police when they killed Pablo. Not true. That's Hollywood. I was back at the base. I was actually talking to all the U.S. operators in their room when I saw the colonel's executive staff kind of rushing over to his office. And fortunately, we had a good enough working relationship with Colonel Martinez that we could go over, and he saw me and he motioned for me to come on in and stand in the back and listen. And one of the lieutenant colonels leaned over and says, "We think we found Pablo." Well, we've heard that before, you know, so you want to get excited, but you're thinking, all right, is this going to be another false positive, you know, or is this just going to be another wild goose chase? So you kind of stand back and you hold your breath. And Colonel Martinez tells his son, he said, "Listen, you guys secure." This is the elite police unit that Javier and I have been working with that are out there. There's only maybe 10, 12 guys. He said, "You guys secure it. We're going to mount the troops and head out your way." Well, think about it. There were 600 people in this search block. How long does it take to get 600 people together in uniform, issue their weapons, give them assignments, get them on the trucks, and get them out there? It doesn't happen in just a few minutes, right? So what the unit did out there is they were afraid that Pablo was going to escape. So they went ahead and they used, we call it deck cord. They draped it around the door of the row house that Pablo was in, blew the door open, made entry. This is a 3-story row house. The first floor was a garage and kitchen combination. I know it sounds kind of weird, but that's the way it was. Go up to the second floor and there's living room and dining room and those type areas. And then the third floor has the bedrooms. As the police get to the second floor, Pablo's already making his way up to the third floor and he sees them. They order him to drop his weapons. He starts shooting at the police. So this gun battle ensues. What was amazing to everybody that day is Pablo only had one bodyguard with him. I mean, this is a guy that at one point had as many as 500 sicarios protecting him. Now he's down to one. So they get up on the third floor. There's a window that looks out on the roof of a 2-story attached row house behind him. The bodyguard jumps out first. He's running across the rooftop. The police officers on the backside that were protecting the backside ordered him to drop his weapon. He fired shots at them, so they shot him. He fell off the roof dead. Pablo gets up to that third floor window. He climbs out because he knows the guys are coming up the steps after him. He's already been shooting at them. He sees that his bodyguard has been shot off of the roof, so he jumps down on that roof and he's trying to hug the wall, trying to protect himself, but he knows he's going to be in a crossfire. So he tries to make a dash across the roof. The cops, you know, he's shooting at them. They engage him back. They catch him in a crossfire. And that's the day Pablo Escobar ceased to exist.
What a story. Javier, in a photo. It appears as though I think both of you guys were posing with Pablo's dead body. Were you on site when he was killed? Where were you?
No, Betsy, with me it's a little different. The ambassador, the day before Escobar gets killed, orders me. There's an informant by the nickname and alias of Navigante. And so Navigante gets a hold of the ambassador that he knows where Escobar is, but only wants to give the information to me because I knew him from the first search. Anyway, so the ambassador says, Javier, you need to go to Miami. I said, sir, we're close to Escobar. We have information. We're almost on him. He says, I do not care. He says, if you don't go to Miami, you disobey my orders, I'm kicking you out of Colombia. So obviously I couldn't win. So I got on an airplane. And the irony of this is when I see the informant, he's on the phone and he drops the phone and says, Javier, they just killed Pablo Escobar. So obviously I get on the plane back. I come back that night. I go to Medellin the next day. We pick up Steve, congratulate all the guys, but I was not there.
Interesting. Well, there is no doubt, even though you weren't there at that exact time, there's no doubt that Javier Pena and Steve Murphy are the guys that took down Pablo Escobar. How do you guys think his capture and, ultimate death changed the drug trade?
You know what? The death of Pablo Escobar meant a lot because of all the innocent people that he killed. We put the number at 10 to 15,000. One of his Sicarios, a guy by the name of Popeye, just got out about 5 years ago, claims it's closer to 50,000 people. So it was a win because of this barbaric trafficker who killed anybody who got his way. Women, children, the car bombs, the assassinations, the bounties on police officers. So it was like I said, it was a personal win for Colombia. However, the drug trade stopped for about 2 weeks. Then it continued back up again. And while we were searching for Pablo Escobar, Cali Cartel, Pablo Escobar's rivals and enemies, were getting stronger and stronger. They took over the drug business. Then they get taken down. The moral of the story is you take down one organization, another one is right there to take it over.
Yeah,
Steve, any more thought on that?
Actually, I do. And this is not, this is not a derogatory remark against law enforcement or anything, but the drug problem, we took out the Medellin cartel, Cali stepped up. We took out the Cali cartel, the North Valley cartel stepped up. We took them out. Don Berna stepped up. All this back to back. There's so many evil people out there waiting to take advantage of all this hard-working, honest taxpayers, that get caught up in this stuff. So Javier and I have given us a lot of thought on this, and we're of the opinion that we as a world cannot arrest our way out of the drug problem. I mean, look at this opioid epidemic, the fentanyl issues we're having here in the United States. Now methamphetamine's making a major comeback in the U.S. We're not saying, though, that we have to do away with the enforcement efforts, because we still need the brave men and women of law enforcement who are willing to put themselves between harm's way and all of us to protect us. So again, this is not anything against enforcement. We're very, very pro-enforcement along the way, but we've got to do a better job. We don't have the answers. We personally believe that education has a lot to do with maybe at least slowing down the drug scourge in our country. You remember when we were younger, they had the DARE program. One of the political administrations came in and cut the funding to that. Well, we travel all over the United States. We travel all over the world. But here in the U.S., we can't tell you how many people have come up to us after our shows, and they say, man, I remember the DARE program, and I love that program. The police officer, he was one of our friends, and that had a lot to do with educating me. Well, now there's independent funding, I believe is the way it goes now. So the DARE program is back out there. But we're also proponents of taking maybe a community approach. You're probably familiar with the DEA's 360 program.
Mm-hmm.
I love that program because it's not fair to look at our law enforcement and say, this is your problem, fix it. Or to look at our legislators, or to look at our psychologists, or the point being here, we need to approach this from a community perspective in which all areas of our community are participating, working towards a common goal of defeating narcotics. So they have a program in Houston. Javier and I got to speak there a couple years ago, it was a mayor's program where they were actually doing this. And so they brought in doctors, pharmacists, law enforcement, legislators, housewives, faith-based community, a representation of the entire community to work towards that common goal. You know, if we had the definitive answer how to stop narcotics, we'd be wealthier than a dermatology physician, I'm sure. But we don't have the answer, but we got to do something better than what we're doing now.
Absolutely. Well, that leads us into, I always end this with 5 key takeaways. And we were talking about law enforcement, and law enforcement right now is a hot topic, right? So what 5 pieces of advice would you give new agents or just law enforcement officers in this time?
Yeah, I'll go, and I'll just say, you know what? Don't give up. It's don't give up. Your dedication, ethics. Ethics is very important right now in law enforcement, in that personal sacrifice where you're going to be working weekends, you're going to be working nights. You know it, right?
Absolutely.
You know all that. You know the hey, I can't make it for dinner. Thanksgiving, sorry, honey, I've gotta work. And you know what? We did a lot of that. But it's just that dedication, that ethical aspect that all of us has, and do not compromise yourself. And just, you know what, everybody is a human being out there. We got to treat people fairly, and you got to be like I said, on the right side, basically.
Yeah, that's great. Steve?
And just, I'm kind of lumping these together instead of putting them out in bullets. If you got to understand, law enforcement is not so much an occupation as it is a lifestyle. You know that is better than most people do because you live it on a daily basis with your husband. And not only do the agents and the analysts and the diversion investigators, do they sacrifice, but the family sacrifices as well. I thought I did a pretty good job after I got back from Columbia of keeping up with my family. And as they're all older now, and we talk about it, I realized that, I can't imagine how many things I must have missed. And I thought I was doing a pretty good job. But the other thing is, just like Javier was addressing there, being a special agent, being in law enforcement, that makes you a public servant. Now, a lot of people look at that title as a derogatory term. Well, I don't. I look at it as a badge of honor, because what greater calling can there be than you're willing to commit your entire professional life to serving your fellow man. Now, that carries a lot of responsibility, and some of the things that are going on lately, that's just caused a lot of unrest in our country. The public servants let the public down. You're there to protect the public. I don't want to go into details. This is such a hot topic with everybody right now, but justice was not served that day. The people that we trusted to do that let us all down.
Absolutely.
But having said that, of the tens and hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officers there are in the United States, it's less than 1% that make the stupid decisions that choose to go over to what we call the dark side. The sad thing is, just like I stigmatized the whole country of Colombia because the only ones I knew were drug traffickers, well, that's happening to law enforcement. But as well as I do, Betsy, and if you just stop and think about it, it doesn't matter what occupation you're in. There are people that are going to let us down, aren't they?
Absolutely.
The media just sensationalizes everything so much. In this case, you know what? Probably rightfully so, because the world does need to know what's going on out there. But please, if you're going to get into a line of work like this, understand you answer to the public. You're representing the public, and you're dedicating your life to serving the public. So wear that with a badge of honor. Maintain your integrity. I told this to a graduating high school class last year. Giving up your integrity is like giving up your virginity. You don't get it back. Don't compromise your integrity for anybody. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
That's so well said and very timely, both of you, Javier and Steve. So thanks for those words. This was so fantastic. Hearing about 2 brave men who really did extraordinary things, even though you're humble about it. How can my listeners learn more about you, hear more about you, read more about you, and get plugged into who the real men of Steve and Javier are?
And for you single guys, if you're looking for Javier's Black Book, this might help you a little bit too. But You can find out more about us at our website, www.deanarcos.com. Just a few years ago, I had no social media. I didn't know what Facebook was, other than my kids would drive me crazy with it. But we're now on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Vimeo, YouTube, and LinkedIn under DEA Narcos. And now our book is out, Manhunters, How We Took Down Pablo Escobar. And currently, through the end of June, we're offering a discount on our website for an autographed and personalized copy. So even if you don't get the book, come and visit our website. There's an active calendar on there. There's photographs, there's videos, there's podcasts, a lot of information on there about us.
Very good. Well, I would encourage all of our listeners to buy your book. It's great. And to support you guys, because I think you're not only interesting, but you represent good of law enforcement, the real public servants that we need today. So thank you both, Javier and Steve, for joining me. This is Betsy Warnley with another episode of The Forefront 5.